So it's been a while since I last made a devlog, just because I've had a fair amount of other stuff I've had to be doing where I had to take breaks on development, and there was some parts that were just going really slow as well. But I've accomplished a fair amount since I last made one of these videos. Starting off with Head Collector, which is a boss, and they are also the person who at the start of the game walks into the church you're in and then kills all your neighbors, family, and yeah. Because of that, this is a boss that is important to the player, and so I needed to treat this boss fight with a little more attention than the other boss fights. And so I started off by giving Head Collector a bit of a murderous personality. I didn't want to go too far into it because you can't really show too much personality in a boss fight, but if you just do like a basic one and try and connect some themes into the way your boss fights, then it makes them a little more interesting and they feel a little more unique. So then also with this boss fight, I find that if you give yourself something you have to design around, then you'll generally come up with some more creative attacks. And so what I did is I placed these 4 chandeliers at the top of the screen, which the player could jump onto, and also made it like a mechanic. Since the player had unlocked the wall climb recently, this would be a boss that would test their ability with the wall climb. I didn't end up playing as much as a role as I initially intended, but it was still important to the boss. And then I also had it that the boss would go up to the chandelier so that it didn't feel like it was just an option for the player. Like, you know, the boss could kind of do everything you could do. It was just about you doing it better. And there's different attacks and that stuff, but just with movement at least. And then after the boss fight, there was a little bit of a cutscene. Since this was an important boss, I had it be an important moment for the game when you beat them. So you unlock a new ability, and then there's also this shadowy hand that comes out and crushes one of your hearts. And this is permanent. So now instead of having 3 health, the player has 2 health. And this is involving the story a bit, but essentially the player is slowly dying from the Hungering Axe, which is the weapon they use. So there's that, and then they wake up in this room where there's like a statue that has one end twisted into rock and then the other coming out at a bit of an angle and looks weird. It's a little unnatural, and then there's also blood everywhere, so then it makes you think, well, what happened? And it's just like adding a bit more mystery to what that shadowy hand is. Like, it's not just like it comes onto the screen, crushes your heart, then you keep on playing exactly how it went off, you know, like the player went somewhere that you don't really know about, kind of like a blackout. So after that, I have a couple of dark levels, is what I'm calling them, where it's just like you have to move through some places where you can't see your player. It's just like a small little platforming section. It's nothing crazy difficult, it's just something a little bit interesting that breaks up the flow of what has been going on so far throughout the game. And then once you clear those dark levels, you come across the Goblin Den. What I'm doing from now on is, instead of making the dungeon and then making the boss, I'm making the boss and then making the dungeon. That way I can make the dungeon designed to train you for the boss fight as best as I can, without like showing all my cards yet, you know, because we want there to still be surprises during the boss fight and for it to still be challenging, but just so that the player gets a bit of practice with some of the things that are going to come up with the boss fight. So the main mechanic of this dungeon, which is called Goblin Den, are these bells, which basically when you walk over them, they will ring and then something will happen. There's different stuff that happens with all of them. And I start off by making it that the only way the player can progress is if they have to enter this room, which will cause them to ring a bell with something small that happens. So then they'll think, well, hang on, what if I ring more bells? And then they'll do that throughout the game. The next one they ring is gonna give them an item, and then the one after that spawns a enemy, which on its own isn't a challenge at all, but it does get brought up again in the boss fight. Then this basically tells you that you should be ringing the bells, but also a little cautious about them, because you don't entirely know what's going to happen until you ring them. For the game, the plan with the story is that you are going to end up being an ally with the goblins. So, despite the name being Goblin Den, you will encounter no goblins until the boss fight. Just because I didn't want the player to kill a bunch of goblins and then they would later fight alongside them. It would be kind of interesting, but just like the goblins would hold grudges against the player. So I just avoided that entirely and made this more of a platforming and puzzle dungeon. Even though I say puzzle dungeon, there's only one puzzle in it, which isn't even that complex. It's just you have to ring a couple bells in a specific order, but the platforming is there. Other than the bells, we also have these new spikes, which will rotate between being on and off, and they come up in the boss fight as well. Then also for the art, I had these little circle things, which were kind of like shaped to look like goblin heads, and the goblins use these to grow mushrooms by dampening it with water that drips from the caves. And adding that in just kind of like makes it feel a little more like it's got a bit more of a personality, you know, like you want to think about how your characters live in the world and how that's gonna affect the world when doing artistic stuff. So then there's Goblin Queen, who is a fairly difficult boss, and she involves her goblins in her fight because I wanted it to make it, you know, she's the Goblin Queen. She gives the orders to all the other goblins and they serve her. But I didn't want the other goblins to end up dying with that whole grudge thing I said. So then I just had them act as like a wall that would stop you from leaving the arena. Meanwhile, Goblin Queen tries to kill you. Then I was trying to make the last ability relevant a bit that you unlock from Edge Collector, which basically makes it so that you can see weaknesses for enemies, enemies with weaknesses will take more damage from certain attacks. Would that be like upwards, downwards, horizontal, or thrown? So then there's these bells which the Goblin Queen will also ring during the fight, and you can ring them on your own, but like, I mean, it's not a good idea. And then they spawn these little crossbows, which not a threat on their own, but like having to deal with them while dealing with a boss makes it a little tougher. And there's also some lore stuff with the goblins, where basically gold keeps them calm. So then the Goblin Queen wears gold armor, and then as you attack her and strike off that gold armor, then her sanity bar will also reduce. And I would like to be a little more experimental with how I use the sanity and health bars and relate them back to each other, but I do need to try and not expand my scope for this game too much. And then if there's more stuff I want to do once I've released it, then I can add in some expansions. So then after you beat the Goblin Queen, who's also a pretty important character, you know, they basically decide to align with you rather than be killed by you. And then this is the first time the player gets a companion through the story, so that's like a fairly big reward, you know, like you go through and you fight a bunch of bosses on your own, and then now you fight a boss and they're offering to be your friend, kind of. And then you also get to learn a bit more about the story, which keeps itself fairly vague up until now. Like, it doesn't really talk about what's going on. You get the idea of what's going on, but like you don't really know anything about the world or the people that live in it. So here's when the game starts opening up its story. Beyond that though, like, some people are not going to be happy with the story and friendship being a reward for the boss fight. So also there's this merchant which you can talk to and just gain a couple focuses from them. And speaking of focuses, I've made a lot more. I designed all of them and I haven't implemented all of their mechanics yet, but most of them are done. And for the UI with that, I was just trying to give each different focus a personality. That way it's not just about the different mechanics they do, but like giving them a different visual design makes them feel more different. Having little animations when your mouse hovers over them, I like adding that in just because it makes them feel a little more special, like they're a cool item or whatever. Considering there's no other items you can get in the game, I hope that these focuses the player will appreciate. Otherwise, I also added in a how to play screen, which has a couple different books which you can choose from. I've only finished the basics book at the moment, and there's going to be 2 others for the abilities and advanced platforming. And they're basically like guides on how you should play the game. And considering the tutorial, I do have those foundations of a game jam, so it's a little shaky and I'm not entirely happy with it. So I just wanted to make sure that I could do all the bonus stuff possible to make sure the player has a good understanding of how to play the game. And yeah, I also just had a bit of fun with the UI over there, which is fairly simple, but I haven't really done too much advanced stuff with UI yet, so it was kind of fun. And there's also some other small effects and polishes I always do, and some bug fixes, but I won't get into those. That's basically all I've done since the last video. Moving forward, I'm just making more content, more dungeons, more bosses, finished game, which I've got 4 more bosses to do and 3 more dungeons. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in the game, it's got an itch page right now. It's not on Steam yet, though I will be making a store page for that soon. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you're interested in where this game might be going, then consider subscribing or giving it a thumbs up. So that's it, and have a good day.